Shem, today's daf yomi is the Avodah Zarah daf Mem Zayin, Avodah Zarah 47. Today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim Atzal for the Shviyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael. We're going to start on the bottom of 46b. The Gemara is continuing around 8 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is continuing the discussion where we've established that you know that if an idolater has worshipped an animal or a mountain, then it does not become prohibited to be used for a hediot, for something that's not sacred. The Gemara asked the question, what about can you use that animal for a korban? And the Gemara raised that question and didn't answer it. In that context, the Gemara raises another question in that context. And the Gemara says, Bai Rami Bar Chama, what about Hamashtachaveh with Kamas Chitim? Let's say you bow down to a standing piece of wheat. So, Ma'u Menachos, can you use that standing piece of wheat for a grain offering? Meaning to say, do we say, even according to the position that says you would not be allowed to use that animal for a korban, can you now use the standing wheat for a grain offering? Do we say, Shinoi b'neva or ain't Shinoi b'neva? Do we say, since it was changed from grain to wheat, now it can be worshipped, or do we not establish that? And that was the question that Rami Bar Chama asked. So Amar Marzocha Breder of Nachman Tashma, because we learned this in the Braisa, Koa Usurin, Lagavim Mizbeach, Vado Sam Mutarim. We have a Mishnah which says anything that was prohibited to go on the altar, its offspring are permitted. The Taniyawa, Rebbe Eliezer Oser. So it's a dispute amongst the Tanaim whether or not you could use the offspring of an animal that was prohibited for the altar. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. You can't say it's a Nachokas Tanaim. Didn't we learn about that? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Barabua. That dispute is Nachokas Kishenirbu L'Sofibru, where the animals were sodomized, and only after they were sodomized did they then become pregnant. When it was sodomized, that's when we say it was prohibited and became prohibited for the altar. So since it was sodomized and then become pregnant, that's when there's a dispute. Because do we say since it had one partner, which was one parent, which was not prohibited, and one parent that was, maybe we say zev gorem mutter or usher. So that's a dispute. Aval ibru b'sof nirbo. But if it first became pregnant and then became prohibited, everybody would say that the animal was prohibited. And that's exactly like our case here, where you have the standing grain was worshipped and then it becomes prohibited. So we know for sure it should be prohibited. Gemara says no. There's an alternative version of this, or it's not no, but there's an alternative version. Alternatively, the whole dispute is where they first became prohibited, it became sodomized, and only afterwards it become pregnant. That's where there's a dispute. But if it became pregnant and then afterwards was sodomized, divrei hakol, everybody would say that it's prohibited because it's like the fetus was itself sodomized. Divrei hakol aser on top of 47a. Vahani nami, in this case here, ki'iru b'sof nirdo. In this case here is also like it was pregnant and then became sodomized because it was standing and then became worshipped. Gemara says, Asha, two cases are not the same. The case of the wheat is not the same as the case of the animal. Hasami karbeim abashbeim. The animal was initially an animal and then it was sodomized. When it was pregnant, it was still remained an animal. The animal there just wasn't born. It was just that we didn't see it, meaning say the doors of the womb were closed in front of it. The word dasha is the gate. The dasha is like a gate. So it was closed in front of it. But here it's something totally different. Here is wheat and now it's flour. So now the Gemara has another Ibai, a similar Ibai. Let's say you bow down to a palm tree. Lulav ma'ul mitzvah. The lulav, can you use the palm frond for a mitzvah? So do we say, even if you want to say, Rashi says, that that if it was attached to the ground, you cannot use it for the temple. Here, what about the lulav? Because it's no longer attached to the ground. Or the assumption is, we'll see from the next debate that it was nullified. So that has to be the assumption here. Lulav, well, yeah, can now be, we know that it could be used for a human being. For regular purposes, it can be used for the temple. But it's no longer on the ground now. It's bound and moved. It's no longer, you want to use it as a mitzvah by shaking the palm frond. So, well, no, it's not that it's in a different form. The point is that it's no longer that it, whether or not it's capable of becoming prohibited because it was something that was initially attached to the ground. So that you can't prohibit something that's attached to the ground but to be used for a regular person. So the question is, can you prohibit something that's for sacred purposes that was attached to the ground? So that was what we just asked by an animal and by wheat. And now we're asking a question about a mitzvah. So the Gemara is going to say, why is this a question? The Gemara says, so like, why is this a different question? Here's why. Because if it was a tree that was initially planted for idolatry, well, it's not a question. Because then we would say even for a regular person it's prohibited to use. We're talking about a tree that was planted and then worshipped. According to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, if something was initially planted and then worshipped, we're going to say He says even for regular purposes it's prohibited. The only question according to the Rabban would say if it was planted and then worshipped, do we say with respect to a mitzvah? Do we say it's not sacred purposes? It's a mitzvah, so it's less. It's not hektish. It's a mitzvah. Do we say mima is kapik avo? Do we say something became rejected from God or not? Kiyasi Ravdimi asked this question. He said about Asherah Shabitla coming by. He said, no, I have this question about an Asherah tree that he nullified. Do we say yesh dichoyetz mitzvah or ein dichoy mitzvah? He said, do we say that it was pushed off once it was disqualified for use? It can no longer be used for a mitzvah or not, or ein dichoy mitzvah. The tivshalei midrabanan. So Gemara says, why don't we answer this case from the fact that it said in the Mishnah, Tishrei Miditnam, which it said in the Mishnah in Chulin, there's a mitzvah called Kisoy Adam, that after the animal, the fowl is slaughtered, you have to cover over the blood with earth. So Kiso, let's say you covered over, Viniskale, became uncovered, Pater Mil Chasos. Then you no longer have to cover it again. Kiso Arua Chayav Chasos. But if the wind covered over, you have to cover it again. How do we explain this Mishnah? When if the wind did it, do you have to go ahead and do it again? That's only the case where it became uncovered again. But if it didn't become uncovered again, then you don't have to cover it. And we asked about that. If it became uncovered, why do you have to cover it again? It's been pushed off from the mitzvah. So why do you have to go ahead and cover it? You were disqualified at that moment from doing the mitzvah. You're not pushed off from the mitzvah. You think about this like certain mitzvahs that at the moment you can't do it, but now later on you can. Let's say there's a person who is an onen when it comes to counting the Omer. He misses a day because he's an onen. He was pushed off from that mitzvah, but now he's back in. So it's like maybe that's a similar case. So the Gemara says, so why are we asking this question again? Isn't this Rav Papa? So isn't this the question that it's not pushed off? So the Gemara says, no, Rav Papa, the Rav Papa Gufay, by the way. The question is on Rav Papa himself. Do we say Mivsha Pshitale Rav Papa mitzvos? Do we say it's obvious to Rav Papa that we don't push anything off, the mitzvah is never pushed off? Do we say that that's the case? Not even be lenient or strict. In the case of the Kisoy Adam, the covering the blood, he's being strict. In the case of the palm frond, he wants to be lenient. Do we say no? It's not pushed off even to be lenient. Or maybe Sifukim Misafko, maybe he wasn't sure if we say a mitzvah can be pushed off. And Amrinan, to be strict, we say go ahead and do the mitzvah again. But to be lenient, we don't say go ahead and do that mitzvah. So take it. Tomorrow we leave that question unresolved. By Rav Papa has the following question. So a similar question. Let's say you bow down to an animal Samra mao with tchelas. Can you take the wool from the sheep and use it for the tchelas? That's the question. The tchelas are the purple thread that you attach to the tzitzis. So the Gemara asks the question, Tchelos Demai, which Tchelos? Eat Tchelos Kohanim, if it's for the big day kahuna, for the garments of the Kohanim. And the Gemara's basic question is, as Rashi explains, do we say that since it's the garments of the kahuna are what's called machshirei carbon, they're paving the way for us to do the sacrifice. And so therefore, do we say that's like the sacrifice and it can't be used? And if you want to say it's like the sacrifice, then maybe it's been changed. Maybe there's a yeshinoi benevad since it was changed. So basically, there's two questions. Do we say that the garments of the kahuna are like the sacrifice and therefore you can't use it? And even if you would say that they're like the sacrifice and you can't use it, maybe here you can because it was changed by dyeing the wool purple. So the Gemara says that maybe that's the question. Do we say because it's a machshirei carbon. The carbon is the sacrifice, and the garments are something that you can't bring the sacrifice unless you're wearing the garments. So it's the garments of the Kohen are like the sacrifice. They make the sacrifice possible, or you can't do the avodah without it. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Hainu by Rami Bar Chama. This is exactly the question that Rami Bar Chama asked at the beginning of our sugya about using the wheat. This is exactly the case. Eat cheles with tzitzis, and if the cheles are the tzitzis, and the question is, can you use it? Do we say ma seitz mitzvah or dichoy mitzvah? Hainu the Reish Lakish. That's exactly the question that Reish Lakish asked. So why are you asking this question? How about the Reish Lakish? First, it's inachinami. You're right. This is exactly the question. So the lo having been by way, the Rav Papa shouldn't have asked this question. No, he only asked it about the cheles, but he had other questions associated with it. He said mao with cheles, the tzamar mao with cheles. Can you use the wool for the cheles? Karne mao chatzos. Can you use the horns of an animal that was worshipped for trumpets. Shokel mao chalilin. You use the thighs, I guess the thigh bone for a flute. B'nei me'er mao peiros. Can you use the intestines for the threads of the harp? So that was his question. According to one that says the main music that the Levites had to make in the temple was by a musical instrument. Well, tibayach the vadayasa for sure it's prohibited. Because it's clearly being used directly for the service. But according to the one who says, this is the dispute in Sukkah Daf Nunamabis, according to the one who says that the main music is with the mouth, then Besume Kala Ba'amahu Umaisina. And do we say, well, this music with an instrument is just to make a sweeter sound, and therefore you're allowed to use it? Or do we say it's also under these circumstances prohibited because it's been rejected? And this is less of a connection. It's more attenuated, and so therefore maybe it should be permitted, or maybe it's prohibited because it's for the purpose of a carbon itself. So therefore, the Gemara says teiko. We have a question on resolve. What about if you bow down to a spring? Meima of mahu. What can you do with the water of the spring? Can you use it for the nesachim? Can you use it for the water libation on Sukkot? So the Gemara says, "My kami ba'alei." Well, what's the question? If you want to say, if you want to say the question is he bowing down to his reflection, Odama Maya Kasagid, or is he bowing down to the water? He should have asked the question then about whatever's in the basket. Can it be used of water? Can it be used for regular purposes? But from the fact that he asked the question about the stream and for the temple purposes, that shows that if it would be removed from the ground and he bowed down to it, everybody would say it's prohibited for a regular person. And so here we're talking about something that is attached to the ground, and now it was attached to the ground, and he bowed down to the water. And he's asking the following question. Amai the Kamei Kosagid is asked, did he worship the water right in front of him? The Kamei Kamai Osdu, and now that water is gone. Odemo Davruna the Maya Kosagid, or maybe he worshiped the stream, and therefore it's going to be prohibited. Umi, Gemara says, Umi Mitzri, can you really prohibit the stream? You can't prohibit the water. It belongs to everybody. So the Gemara says, no, we're talking about a spring that was coming out from a private land, and therefore it's a question. Okay, so now we're up to the question of houses. Somebody has a house next to an idolater's house. The Nafal, and they basically shared a wall. Right, Rashi says that one of the walls of the idolater was his wall, was next to his house. One of his walls was adjacent to the idolater, and his house, and the wall fell down. Also of noto, you're not allowed to rebuild it because you're building a wall for idolatry. So Kate said, yeah, so what should he do? Konis betoch dalad amos, he should move 4 amos into his property. Ubona. And then he's allowed to build it, but he can't rebuild it otherwise. Gemara says, let's say he shared a wall, and basically half the wall was his, and the other half of the wall was the idolaters. Then Nidon, from the top of 47b, Nidon Melchsal Melchsal. So then that portion of the idolatry, he doesn't count as his 4 amos, and he has to count 4 amos for himself. And so goes in 4 amos from his part, and then he can build it. First example is he doesn't have to calculate. He just moves from the whole wall. Here he only moves 4 amos from his half of the wall, from his part of the wall. No, it's yeah. It's a short distance, moving from half the wall. Havana v'itzav faro, and now it also tells us that the stones of that wall, this is also how it's different, the stones, the wood, and the earth of that wall, metam and kasheretz, they translate tuma like a sheretz, which is tamei till evening, and then you go to the mikvah, shaketz tishatzenu, as it states. Rabbi Akiva, it says about idolatry that it transmits, it's shaketz tishatzenu, which is like a sheretz. Rabbi Akiva Omer kanida says, no, it transmits tuma like a nida, which is tuma even if you're carrying it. And it says tizarem kamo dava, that its stream is like a flow. Tizaram, tiz, as it says in the pasuk, tizram, tizram kamo dava. Say tomarlo. Mani da metamim masa, avods chom metamim masa. So it transmits tuma through carrying. So the Gemara says, by going 4 amos into his property, now he's giving more space to the idolater. Idolater's happy. No, you take that empty space, use it for a latrine. Gemara says, so you can't do that. You need modesty. No, he uses it at night. No, you're supposed to go to the bathroom at night just like you go during the day. Even though you have to walk. So you still need to be modest. And Gemara says, no, he made the bathroom for children there. No, he fills it up with thorns and hedges, and so therefore the idolater doesn't benefit. There are 3 types of houses. There's one house is a house you built initially speaking for idolatry. Such a house is going to be prohibited. Since it was built initially for idolatry, it's always prohibited. Unless he nullifies it. And how does he nullify it? He has to destroy a little bit. And if it's a Jew, it's prohibited forever. And all the stones and wood from it are always prohibited. No, it says if idolaters built it, the idolaters just need to nullify it. If a Jew built it for that purpose, then it can never be fixed. So if it'd be like a Jew for Jesus, then it would be something that can never be used for Jewish purposes. But if it was idolaters who built it, then they just need to nullify it. So then it's
Jew could be building a house.
what are you talking about? If it was built by an idolater, no, if it was built by an idolater for an idolater, it was a house built for an idolater for idolatry, then the idolater just needs to nullify it and the Jew can use it. If it was built by a Jew for idolatry, then it can never be nullified.
Second category.
It's say, oh, why would a Jew ever do that? Jews. That's what I said, Jews for Jesus. If he's a Jewish person and he's building it for a different faith, there's a lot of them. So some of the most prominent evangelicals grew up Jewish. So the Gemara says, Siyado v'chiyado avodas kochav. And let's say he finished it off by plastering it for idolatry, v'chidesh, or he added something, no toma shachidesh, then he just has to remove it, and then he can move back on and use it. And let's say he brought idolatry into it, wrote seal, and then he took it out. I raised it much, or you can use it immediately. If you bow down to the house, it's prohibited. That's what Rav said. So we see from this statement of Rav, and if it was removed and from the ground, and then you connected it, it's like removed from the ground, and therefore becomes prohibited. But don't we say that you need to have built it for that? So the Gemara says, either one prohibits it. If you build it, even though you never bow down, if you bow down, even though it wasn't built for that, it's prohibited. So then it's 4 categories. Kivin Nulinyam Bitol. No, with respect to nullification, whether you built it or you worshipped it, it's the same law. Therefore, we count it as one case. Next case, Shalosh Avanamim. There are 3 types of law with respect to stones. Number 1, a stone that was initially quarried for idolatry. Haredu Asura, that's going to be prohibited. Let's say you plastered it, you finished it for idolatry. Then you remove the part that you plastered and it's permitted. And let's say you put an idolater on it. You put idolatry on it, the silka, and then it's removed. It's permitted. When do we say this statement where we said in the Mishnah that if siyad v'chiyado Hashem you can just remove it and it's permitted, but you have to remove it? That's where you did it. Begufa sho'evan. That's where you did it into the stone itself. Begufa sho'evan. That you made an engravement into the stone. But if it was just on top of it, it's permitted even without nullification because you didn't worship it. So that's the case. So the Gemara says, well, dumya de bias tana, but isn't it similar to the case of a house? Who bias lav begufehu? A house, it's not internal, umitzar, and it's prohibited. Bias nami. So the Gemara says, no, a house is also internal. Ika bene orbe, you're plastering between the bricks. Milo askina and deshaiva other rishayas. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Aren't you plastering, but then you did it externally? No, we're talking about a case of nullification. Even though you plastered on internally in the stone, when he removes that which he put in, it's good. Because he might have thought, he might have thought once since you put the plaster internally, it's like a stone that was quarried for that. And the whole thing will be prohibited. Kamash will know, just the part that you added on is prohibited. All right, this is today's daf. We'll stop here. Shekoyach.
How do you think